This webinar is one component of our yearly Advanced Teacher Training Series, which is funded by TD's Friends of the Environment Foundation and is facilitated in partnership with York University. Ecosource has been working with York University on this series for almost a decade now in providing hands-on training modules on different environmental themes. And it's a great way for educators to bring sustainability into their classrooms and to learn about new hands-on activities that they can apply directly in class. We also do provide professional development opportunities at the school level. So if you are interested in learning more about our offerings for next academic year, definitely sign up to our newsletter. That link will be at the end of our webinar today. But we are very pleased to have Eric Miller with us. He is an instructor and researcher at York University who will be sharing about the Ecological Footprint Initiative and how this tool can be used to explore sustainability concepts in our classrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Eric.
I'm going to speak about considering the ecological footprint in Ontario classrooms from grade 1 to 12. I realize that it's a pretty broad audience and the scope of education is quite different from that range, but I'm going to try to do justice to that full range. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the ecological footprint to help you as educators to understand what it is and why it's important to measure it. I'm fortunate that a lot of organizations and the Ontario government have provided examples of ways to engage with the ecological footprint in a classroom setting. Although most of the examples tend to use the ecological footprint calculator, which I'll profile shortly. But as I've read through much of the material, I think it would benefit from more clarity about the concept and its measurement. So I'll start off with that. So from a young age, we understand the concept of a footprint. It's the impression left by a foot on the ground. It's easy to see footprints in the sand or footprints from our boots in the snow, let's say, or even muddy feet on the floor. But it's worth thinking about why it's important to measure a footprint using standard units of measure. We measure our footprint to help us find the right size of socks and shoes and boots, of course. And we can compare our footprint measure over time to understand if our feet are growing or changing shapes. This is important because there are some times when it's important or assume that our feet would be growing. Other times, once we reach maturity, that we would not expect them to grow. Now, we measure our footprints using standard measures of length. Just ask you to imagine how difficult it would be if we each had a different measuring system for each person's footprint. Now, we can apply the same thinking to a similar concept, and that is an ecological footprint. An ecological footprint is the area of the planet's ecosystems that is needed to sustain ourselves as humans. And so this little infographic here, I think, does a good job at communicating visually what is included in the measure of an ecological footprint. The ecological footprint includes the area of fisheries needed to sustainably produce the fish products that we eat in a year. In other words, the area needed to provide us with a constant harvest equal to the amount of fish products that we use. The ecological footprint also includes the amount of built-up land that contains our schools, homes, roadways, malls, and all the stuff that we've built on land. The ecological footprint also includes the amount of pasture that's needed to sustain the animals that we eat as humans. The footprint also includes the amount of cropland used to supply humans with the plants that we eat. Now, the ecological footprint also includes a carbon footprint, which is the area of the planet needed to absorb the carbon that humans emit as greenhouse gas pollution from the fuels used in transportation and heating and air conditioning and to generate electricity. And the ecological footprint also includes the amount of forested area needed to sustain our consumption of paper and wood products. Now, we can add all of these up to get the total ecological footprint, to understand the total area of the planet's ecosystems that's needed to sustain ourselves as humans. Now, this concept seems simple enough. The details that go into this calculation are fairly extensive. I'm not going to speak too much about those details, but they are available in case you'd want to delve into some of those details, especially at more of the senior grades in high school, let's say. But I'll just provide a little background to the details, and that is that the detailed accounting system for this was developed in the late 1990s at the University of British Columbia. It's become more advanced each year, and the way in which the calculation is done is detailed in various publications, and it's updated by the Global Footprint Network, which is an organization, a worldwide organization that is headquartered in the United States. And I'll provide a link to their website at the end of this presentation. The system that they developed allows ecological footprints to be compared around the world and over time, which is very useful, just as I said before, in the same way that we want to have a standardized measurement of our actual physical footprints, we want to have a standardized measure of our ecological footprint, because that allows us to make comparisons across time amongst different people and jurisdictions and so on. Now, an ecological footprint can be measured for individuals, and it can also be measured for families, where we add up all the individuals within that family. We can measure it for classrooms and schools. We can measure it for companies and sectors. And now when I say sectors, that means all the companies that produce similar things, such as all the companies that produce concrete, for example. It can be measured for cities, and it has been for a couple of cities in Ontario that are attentive to this. And it can be measured for provinces and states and various regional, let's say, levels of government and so on, and also for countries as a whole. And what's also very impressive is that an ecological footprint can be measured for everyone on Earth. Now, why is it important to measure the ecological footprint? And why is it useful to have a standard way of measuring it? Well, there are many reasons, and so I'll describe those now. The measurement of our ecological footprint helps us to understand how much we depend upon nature in ways that are sometimes not obvious. Even if we live in parts of the city that seem to have very little nature, we still depend a lot on nature much farther away. All of the food and materials that we require, that we use, of course, requires nature. And sometimes very far away, much farther from where we live or go to school or work. As an example, the ecological footprint was calculated a few years ago for all the people who live in Ontario. Using information from the year 2010, the average ecological footprint per person living in Ontario was 6.2 global hectares. Now, I'll give you a sense of what that is in terms of area. 6.2 global hectares is equivalent in area to about 2 times the whole area of the Olympic-sized stadium in Toronto that's called the Rogers Centre, formerly known as the Sky Dome. So 2 of those, in area terms, of all the seats and the field, would be needed on the planet per person to satisfy the ecological requirements of a person living in Ontario. One of these stadium-sized areas alone covers the carbon footprint. And you can see from this pie chart that the carbon component is just over half of the total ecological footprint on average per person in Ontario. From this pie chart, the slim blue line at around the 5 o'clock position is the built-up area footprint, which you can see is a very small part of our ecological footprint. And so that's what's interesting about doing a calculation like this, is it puts that into perspective. Even though a lot of us think that our footprint might be related to the area that we occupy with where we live, where we go to school, where we work, and the roads that carry us between all those places, it's obvious through this calculation, through this system, that we depend upon a lot more of the planet's surface area of ecosystems than is apparent. Now, it's interesting to note that 2 Olympic-sized Rogers Centers would have about 100,000 seats in them. In other words, the amount of the planet's ecosystem needed to sustain the average person in Ontario is much, much higher than the amount of our physical footprint. And indeed, even our physical butt print when we're sitting down. Another reason why it's important to measure the ecological footprint is that it helps us to make comparisons over time to see if and how it's changing. We can use the ecological footprint to see the progress that we make when we reduce wastes, when we change our transportation systems, when we save energy, and when we add more nature and repair injured ecosystems. Back to the Ontario example, we can compare this 2010 data to data from the year 2005 because an assessment was done using that year's data as well. Over this period of 5 years, Ontario's ecological footprint was reduced, even though the number of people grew in Ontario. Now, this is great news from an ecological perspective and from an environmental perspective. What's noteworthy is that a key factor that reduced the footprint was the reduction in the carbon component, which was reduced because Ontario was not burning as much coal to generate electricity as part of the government's plan to phase out coal-fired electricity generation. This reminds us that there are actions that we can take as individuals and as families to reduce our footprint, and there are also important actions that can only be done collectively through government. Now, another reason why it's important to measure the ecological footprint is that it helps us to make comparisons with others, such as between different individuals or different schools, different cities, between different provinces and countries. So, for example, when we make comparisons between schools, even if we calculate the footprint per student or per person at the school to include the teachers and other staff, this can help us to understand how some schools might be more ecologically efficient. The schools, let's say, use up less nature to deliver their education. Finally, another reason why it's important to measure the ecological footprint is that it can be compared to the area of ecosystems that are available. The ecological footprint is often used to measure sustainability. Now, sustainability generally means the ability to maintain something at the same level over time. Now, in your education about sustainability, you probably refer to the definition of sustainable development. And that definition is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Since we will always have the need for nature to supply us with food and materials and energy, and to deal with our wastes, then it's important to consider how the ecological footprint compares to the amount of ecosystems and how the amount of ecosystems is trending over time. Now, sustainability can be valued at various geographies, such as for the province of Ontario. The area of Ontario contains many ecosystems. Some are much more productive for supplying us with food and forest products than others are. The detailed calculations of the ecological footprint take these differences into account, and they allow us to compare the ecological capacity of a jurisdiction, such as in Ontario, with the calculation of the ecological footprint of all the human activity within, in this case, the province. Now, the calculation for the ecological capacity is also very detailed. I'm not going to provide too much detail here. But again, my point here is that it's one thing to calculate the ecological footprint as a measure of the surface area that's needed to sustain us as humans. But it's very important to measure this to the amount available. And now the Global Footprint Network calls this biocapacity. I think I'll just call it ecological capacity. Since we're talking about the ecological footprint, we want to compare the footprint to the amount of capacity. The earlier research that I mentioned about Ontario found that the ecological footprint for all of Ontario's residents works out to be about the same amount of the planet's ecosystems as are provided within the boundaries of Ontario's full province. Wow, that's a big area when you think about it. So whenever you leave the city and see lots of forests and farmlands across Ontario, keep in mind that this is an amount equal to all the area that's used across the planet to sustain all of our consumption in Ontario. So in other words, even though it looks like there's a lot of nature out there that we haven't yet consumed, actually we're consuming the products of a lot of nature, even if it's not apparent to us. And that leads to another important teachable point, and that is that many of the things that we consume in Ontario come from outside of Ontario. And many of the things that we produce in Ontario were made to be consumed outside of Ontario. In other words, Ontario trades lots of stuff with the rest of the world. In this same way, Ontario's trade involves using a lot of ecological capacity outside of Ontario's boundaries. The measurement system of the ecological footprint takes these trade relationships into account. The footprint of any country, such as Canada, is calculated as the size of ecosystems of the planet that are needed for all of what Canada consumes, even when it consumes something that was produced in the United States or elsewhere. And so when we make this comparison on any jurisdiction, we can assess the extent to which a jurisdiction's residents are sustainable or can be sustained with the ecosystems within that jurisdiction. The ecological footprint can be compared to ecological capacity around the world. Here's a map that color codes each country based on how the ecological footprint of the people in that country compares to the ecological capacity of each of those countries to provide for all the components of the footprint. Remember, this includes the built-up area for its residents, plus the fisheries needed, plus the pasture lands needed for animals that are eaten, plus the cropland needed for plants that are eaten, plus the forested lands needed to provide wood and paper products and to absorb the waste carbon that's emitted by burning fossil fuels for transportation and energy. Countries in green here on the map are what we would call more ecologically sustainable than countries in the red. Countries in the red rely upon the ecological capacity in other countries in the green. And conversely, countries in the green, such as Canada, provide ecological capacity to the rest of the world. Now you can see there are big differences, and this raises some interesting questions in the classroom. Now, there are a lot of really interesting visualizations that have been done with calculations of the ecological footprint and its comparison to the ecological capacity within countries and around the world. I won't show all these visualizations, but there are many to choose from, including especially when we have a measurement of the ecological footprint per person and we compare that to different people across the planet. The ecological footprint per person on average in Canada is very high, much higher than the ecological footprint of people in many parts of the world, especially in very populated parts of the world where their consumption per person is much smaller relative to the consumption in Canada. And so this raises lots of interesting questions in the classroom, dealing with questions of equity and justice, and so on. Individual ecological footprints can be estimated relatively easily. Online at footprintcalculator.org, there's an ecological footprint calculator. This is the footprint calculator that was developed by the Global Footprint Network, which I mentioned before, is the organization that's in charge of the standards for how the calculation is done. A lot of the lesson plans and activities that I've seen using the ecological footprint in the classroom, from grades 1 all the way up to the end of high school, involve using this ecological footprint calculator. And I'm not surprised that it involves using this calculator because it is interesting as you do the calculations through the calculator to think about, for example, how much stuff one person individually consumes as compared to others, whether, how their diet compares to the others, if they're in a large versus a smaller home, if they do a lot of travel. When they travel, are they traveling with others? Now, of course, I would assume everyone in the classroom is going to be traveling with someone else, other than in maybe the senior grade years where some can drive on their own, I guess, if they have a driver's license and they're old enough. But this is really important when we're engaging with this at a family level or even an aggregated level at the level of the community and city and so on. Questions about how we move around. And so this is open access, it's free. And so you can use it, and you can also do different versions of this to see, let's say, what the sort of minimum and maximums could be to sort of give a sense as to where the students fall within that range. And of course, the other thing you can do is compare it to the Ontario average, considering that we have Ontario-specific research that I profiled earlier. And that's neat because in a classroom setting, you can see those who are better than the average, or higher than the average, or lower than the average, let's say. I shouldn't use the word better, I just say higher or lower than the average, and then lead to some interesting questions about what can be done to reduce the footprint from those that are higher and even lower than the average to bring down the whole average, and so on. The ecological footprint within the Ontario curriculum has been positioned. I'll just make reference to two documents here. These are provided by the Ministry of Education. They're both about ways of infusing environmental education into the standard curriculum. And for the first guide, which is covering grades 1 to 8, there are 4 examples provided in that guide. And in the guide covering grades 9 to 12, there are 29 examples of the ecological footprint being used as examples, covering all sorts of subjects. Some, as you would expect, such as science and social science, and others that you might not expect, such as even in the arts and so on. So that's good news for all of you as educators if you want to integrate this into the classroom. There are many other organizations that have provided additional information as to how you can set up, let's say, an activity or lesson plan. There are many to choose from online that are open access, and I'm just going to profile one that's been created by BEAN, which is an acronym that stands for the Biodiversity Education and Awareness Network of Ontario, and you can get their material at biodiversityeducation.ca. And among their material is this a sheet that talks about calculating and interpreting the ecological footprint. And so this one they have related to the standard curriculum for geography in grade 9, but certain elements of this can be used at other grades as well. And so they have suggestions for activities in the classroom, and also a suggestion to use the ecological footprint calculator as a starting point to make it more apparent to everybody in the classroom as to what the ecological footprint works out to be for them. Because as I said, this is a really interesting and powerful measurement tool that helps to make apparent what is not obviously apparent in our relationships with nature. The Biodiversity Education Action Network is a network supported by a number of organizations, including Ontario Power Generation, the Royal Ontario Museum, and a whole bunch of non-governmental organizations such as Ecospark, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, Forest Ontario, Ontario Nature, and Biodiversity Council, and so on. And so it's just, I mean, each of those supporting networks themselves I think have some materials using the ecological footprint, so that might be useful as well. So I will, I'll just conclude then by profiling these links for more information. The Global Footprint Network provides information and data about this, and you can find them at this link. And there's an initiative that is just started up based at York University. It's called the Ecological Footprint Initiative. And so if you're interested in connecting with scholarly research and expertise in Ontario, it'll be headquartered at York University in the Faculty of Environmental Studies, which is where I teach. And there's the Ontario Biodiversity Council, which helps to understand the state of Ontario's biodiversity, including Ontario's ecological footprint. Ontario's ecological footprint is one of the measures that's used in the State of Biodiversity Report for Ontario. And you can find that State of Biodiversity Report at sobr.ca. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like to get a copy of these slides, you can reach me at York University at ewmiller@yorku.ca. And if you're interested in the slides, I also have references cited and links to where I got the images.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Eric. It's really neat and fascinating, and I think important to see how these complex concepts can be simplified and applied in our classrooms in engaging ways for students. Now, we would like to shift gears a little bit to discuss how we can take what we've learned about the resources that we can use in this eco-footprint and apply it directly to address the environmental issues that our schools are facing today. So my name is Ariel, and I'm joined by my colleague Vandita. We're here at the Ecosource office. We are waste reduction campaign coordinators with Ecosource. And today we'll be sharing our experience and advice on how to run impactful environmental campaigns. And we'll go over a brief introduction to Ecosource. And as our team's main focus and expertise is waste reduction, that will be the focus of the presentation. Although our tips and advice for these campaigns are absolutely applicable to the different realms of environmental issues that are addressed in the ecological footprint. We'll then speak a little bit more about our success in delivering the Region of Peel's waste reduction workshops and campaigns. We'll share a success story from the campaigns program. And finally, we'll share with you the secrets to running effective environmental campaigns that really create positive and long-lasting environmental change in our school communities. So a little bit about Ecosource to start. We are an innovative environmental education organization that has been around for almost 40 years now, and we specialize in creating fun and hands-on programs that aim to bring green living to our communities. We're very passionate about delivering programs that focus on how all of us can make changes to become better environmental citizens. Our programs focus on topics including waste reduction, teacher education, sustainability education, bringing local food into our schools, community gardening and urban agriculture, and providing youth with leadership opportunities. And our waste reduction team, specifically, we deliver engaging programming that encourages our participants to think more critically about waste. So the things that we're buying, the things that we use, and the things that we eventually throw away, and how all of that would impact our ecological footprint and our environment. We deliver the Region of Peel's waste reduction workshops, and these enable classes to take a closer look at specific and curriculum-linked waste issues. These topics include different issues, including waste sorting, proper waste sorting, something that both students and adults alike have trouble with. They focus on food waste issues, electronic waste issues, conscious consumption, and how our landfills are impacting our environment. And it's unique in that each workshop provides hands-on and accessible activities for students from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. In addition to the workshops, we do deliver the Region of Peel's waste reduction campaigns to schools in Mississauga. And this program, it applies a whole school approach to creating long-lasting behavior change to reduce our waste footprint. And the campaigns run about 2 to 3 months and focus on themes including recycling correctly, reducing food waste, packing wasteless lunches, and replacing disposable drink packaging with reusable bottles. And I'll be going into the nature of these campaigns in just a moment. The last waste reduction offering that our team provides is Ecosource's Work to Reduce program. And this is offered specifically to businesses and organizations. And we use education as the main catalyst to motivate employees to think about their waste footprint as well. Okay, so for this segment of the webinar, I'd like to go over the different components of the fun and successful waste reduction campaigns that we deliver on behalf of the Region of Peel. We've received really positive feedback from the students and from the staff that we work with, and it's incredible to see the lasting impact that they have in our communities. So to begin, Once a school has committed to launching a waste reduction campaign, it's so important to collect baseline data by auditing the school's waste. So Ecosource, we come in to the schools and facilitate a whole day waste audit where students will come in with their classes, get suited up, and audit their previous day's waste, their garbage and their recycling. And we also have touring classes come in where they can soak in the experience as well. And it's really important to have a benchmark for improvement throughout the campaign, but it also provides students with a one-of-a-kind and pretty memorable hands-on learning experience and opportunity, so they can directly see the impact that their school has in just one day. Next, we train a dedicated team of students and teachers to champion the campaign. So we often work with green teams at schools, the staff and the green team club volunteers, but sometimes it'll be just one entire class that wants to lead the campaign, totally up to the school. And for the fun stuff, we now launch the campaign. Once everyone is trained and ready to go, it's time to get the rest of the school on board. So we deliver a high-energy launch assembly where we outline the importance of reducing waste. We really underline why we should care, the goals and rules of the challenge, and students' favorite part, the prizes. So we introduce the exciting prizes which incentivize classes to participate in the challenge. Throughout the challenge, student leaders begin to monitor waste criteria, and this is dependent on the campaign theme that they choose. But as you can see here, it provides really great leadership and skill building opportunities for these students. And once the few weeks of the challenge is complete, it's then time to conduct a final waste audit to see if there have been improvements from when we first started in reducing waste throughout the campaign. And we wrap up the campaign by sharing and celebrating the school's achievements through another assembly, where we announce the top performing classes in the challenge and the winners of the prizes. So now I would like to pass it on to Vandita, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about St. Joseph Catholic Elementary School in Mississauga and their success in these environmental campaigns. And after that, she'll be also sharing some tips on how you can run your own successful environmental campaign next year.
Thank you, Ariel. Now, St. Joseph Elementary School and in Streetsville in Mississauga and Ecosource have been partnering up for quite some time now to tackle waste issues at their school, and that's why they were highlighted in our annual report this year. They participated in the waste reduction workshops for quite a few years before they were inspired to take it to the next level and enroll in the whole school Region of Peel waste reduction campaign. So, and now it's 2 years later and they've completed a food waste reduction campaign in 2016 and a reusable beverage bottle campaign in 2017. So they've come a long way from when they started. The goal of the 2017 reusable bottle campaign was to reduce the amount of plastic waste in their school by encouraging students to bring in reusable containers and reusable bottles for not only water, but also for any other beverages they chose. Jenny Lecko, she was one of our lead teachers for both the campaigns, and she came to us with the interest in making their community more environmentally friendly. She, along with the other teachers, their principal, and the students, all believe that they can make a difference one person at a time. And that is a great attitude to have when dealing with environmental initiatives at school. And now the campaign turned out to be such a success that at this time, or just before school ended, we saw that 96% of the students were regularly bringing in reusable bottles. After the conclusion of the campaign, the school continues to implement spot checks for water bottles and their own classroom challenges just by themselves to keep measuring that success and keep going forward. St. Joseph is definitely an inspiring example of how a community can come together and challenge themselves to reduce their waste one bottle at a time. The fact that St. Joseph's campaign was so successful and that they continue to make long positive strides towards environmental change at their school is attributed to a multitude of factors. They had a really strong team of teachers. In their case, they had 5 teachers working on this, and that meant they could divide the work up, contribute equally, and that helps in reducing the workload for one single teacher. The principal at the school was very committed to environmental action and was very supportive of the teachers and students to take up extracurricular activities and environmental initiatives. And the students not only had a keen interest in learning about sustainability, but they were excited and passionate about taking action on their end. And finally, office staff and support staff at school, like custodians, were really, really helpful because they were on board and they wanted to do everything that they could to bring this campaign together and make it successful. We have been facilitating for the last couple of years about 20 campaigns every year in Mississauga schools between Ariel and myself. And by doing that, we've been able to figure out some best practices for running meaningful and engaging campaigns. So from our experience, the schools with the best outcome and the most student engagement are those that try to reach as many of those factors that I just mentioned. So a good supportive team of teachers, having students that are excited, and you can easily see the excitement once the teachers take up these projects, and you know the teachers are excited, the students take that energy and build on it. Having the principal and vice principal involved is great because that means you have that support to plan and schedule all of these initiatives that you would be needing for the whole school to be part of. And you can see that all of this amounts to great success because the students can be trained on all of their roles. So not only are they leading the campaign, but they are also the carriers of the message to the rest of the school. So it's really great when all of that comes together and can work. When you're choosing an environmental campaign or the issue to address for your campaign, you want it to be relevant to your school's needs. So we suggest involving the students, perhaps a core group like the Green Team, to identify what issues they think the school is facing. If you're going for Ontario Ecoschool certification, you want to consider goals and the criteria that that would earn you points through their programs. And another great way is to take up Eric's message and see how your school's ecological footprint can be made better. So calculating that footprint and identifying the areas that need work and choosing them one at a time. You want to ensure that your campaign and your progress is measurable. So it's really important to conduct an assessment of your issue before the campaign begins and follow that exact same procedure of assessment for the end after the campaign is done. This is really handy because it lets you measure that change and the effectiveness of the campaign. It lets you modify for the next time, you get lots of lessons. And of course, it's really handy if you want to share your initiatives with community members, with parent council, when you're applying to Ecoschools to get those extra points, and for any grants or contests that you may be interested in applying. Not only are you monitoring the data from before and after, like from the waste audits that we conduct, but you also want some sort of quantitative data that's being collected throughout the length of the campaign. So this can be done in the form of a school-wide challenge because that tracks improvement live. You can see it, you can measure it class-wise, and it's a great tool to keep everyone motivated. And you can always make it so much fun because you can have games during lunch, you can have mini challenges, you can think of carnival-type games and so many other things to boost morale and get more students to participate. And we want to keep updating the entire school and also your community through social media, through daily announcements, through the newsletter going out to parents to keep the campaign's momentum and fostering that desired behavior change that we want to see. And from our experience, prizes are always great to keep our students motivated to continue the work. And even if you don't have a huge budget to give for a prize, you can always pick something that's inexpensive, like a play day period, or an extra gym period, or a walk to the nearby park, something out of the ordinary to have the students be excited to work towards, in addition to helping the environment, of course. We definitely want to make the campaign, or rather the results from the campaign, last. So it's essential to have, for the school's benefit, just clear and realistic goals, short-term goals, medium, and long-term that you can work towards. So this can keep the campaign going even after you officially end, even if after you want to just conduct school spot checks and things like that. The campaign that you choose can be scaled to a few weeks, a month, or as long as you want within the school year. But the goal here is to change how students view their role in the environment and how they're inspired to take action for those things. So there's a little bit of a constant that's needed. And you can get this constant through monthly assemblies, bi-weekly green team meetings, maybe some announcements, or maybe trying to come up with a new challenge every couple of months, just so the campaign and its goals are on everyone's mind at school. And the priority is to empower your student leaders to get their classmates excited, because we as educators are the directors, if you can call it that, of this movie, but the students are the actors. They're the stars that are going to take this forward, that are going to be on the front line and actually bring about that change. And of course, like we just mentioned, rewarding the success with special recognition and using some of those prize ideas is always amazing. As I mentioned before, it was mentioned before, these tips that I just went through have worked really well for our waste reduction campaigns here at Ecosource, but they are absolutely applicable to so many different environmental issues that the ecological footprint can identify. So be sure to select an environmental issue that needs addressing at your school and that resonates with a lot of your staff and students. It could be reducing your water or energy footprint. Perhaps you want to increase the number of students that are using active transportation to come to school and go from school. Maybe you want to work towards greening your school grounds more, or anything else that could be unique to your school. There can be many resources and support systems that can be tapped into with some research. I'm sure you'll agree, it's been a real treat as an educator to hear about the Ecological Footprint tool and its application in our schools and our lessons. This tool is incredible because it can convey quantitative information about the impact of our lifestyle, the impact that our lifestyle has on the natural world, and it can be scaled from an individual level to a country level or even to the world level. So it's definitely really cool to see for students. It would be wonderful if educators can integrate this tool into their lessons and use it to motivate that student-led action that brings about long-lasting change. We hope that we've provided you with a starting point to plan your environmental campaigns for the upcoming school year, and that you can work to empower your school communities and make positive changes to reduce your ecological footprint. For more information about our Advanced Teacher Training Certificate and to find out about our waste reduction programs for your schools or businesses or any other environmental program you may be interested in, please email us at teachered@ecosource.ca and we will be really happy to connect with you. You can find out more about Ecosource and all of the work we do in the community and other programs by going to our website at ecosource.ca. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter to find more opportunities like today's webinar, as well as to look into or book different programs that we offer. For any other environmental education related resources and programs offered to educators as well as residents in the region of Peel, teachgreeninpeel.ca is a great resource that I recommend you can go use. And thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found some useful information here to help you bring environmental education into your schools. And at this time, we can open the webinar up for any questions that anyone might have.